Bem-vindos ao Here's the Thing, mais um programa em que temos uma pessoa com quem vamos conversar, que tem algo de especialidade para partilhar connosco e por isso bem-vindos a mais um programa. Vamos fazer isto em inglês porque o Sr. Nick Migliori não deve falar tão bem português como eu e então vou fazer as perguntas em inglês. Nick Migliori is the president of Executek International, uma firma que está no ramo de segurança pública e não só. E ele vai explicar mais um pouco o que é que ele faz na empresa e como é que a empresa funciona. Por isso, bem-vindos. Nick Migliori, President of Executek International.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about you and your company and what the company does and the services you provide so that our audience understand a little bit more about you.
Sure. Well, Executek International is a security services firm, and we provide various services from security guards to private investigators, consulting. We do system design work, threat risk assessments on facilities. Some of the major buildings in Toronto we've worked on to do assessments from a physical security perspective. We make recommendations, threat risk mitigation, and then we work with the clients to develop plans and strategies so that they can protect their property, their visitors, their tenants, and so forth.
So, an all-encompassing security company, which in these days seems to be at the forefront of many things, particularly as the unrest in the world progresses. We just celebrated 9/11, 19 years, that those towers came down, and a lot came out of that event from a security point of view, as the President of the United States at that time promised that border security and immigration security and everything else was put in place. Based on all the implementation of those measures and the fact that terrorist organizations still proliferate and they haven't gone away, do you feel that the measures that were implemented had any effect on a more secure worldwide?
I do believe they have. I think that there were major events like 9/11 that caused not only the security industry, but a lot of the facilities and complicated organizations that own different properties to kind of rethink and look at how these properties get protected, how their guests and visitors get screened and all that sort of stuff. And governments became more in line working with the private sector, and private and public partnerships arose to kind of work together to basically, to be proactive as much as possible to not only work together to protect, but also dissemination of information. How do you communicate when something's happening, and how do you secure a downtown sector, whether it's the financial district or a train station or a complicated tourist destination like the CN Tower, the Rogers Center, facilities like that. So I do believe that 9/11 was a catalyst in helping shift the paradigm in the right direction. But like everything, as time moves on, and here we are almost 2 decades later, and now we're in a different paradigm with this whole pandemic issue. But at that time, for example, I was at the CN Tower, and we had implemented screening processes that have remained in place. So people that visit the CN Tower are going through a screening process, whether it's metal detectors, X-ray, sniffer technology to detect explosives. So at that time previously, that didn't really exist. It was only being used at airports. So now you have a tourist destination that uses that technology, and they've been using it now steadily today. So every visitor going to visit that facility goes through a whole detection process, very similar to airport screening that people go through when they're traveling. So that's an example of, you know, kind of something that happened and then remained in place all these years. So I do believe that yes, that, you know, things have changed for the better in making facilities safer, and large organizations that own lots of property have looked at how to make the buildings as safe as possible, not only from a security perspective, but from a fire safety perspective. And it has been positive.
So based on all of this technology that's been implemented in all the buildings and structures and airports, as you suggest, the human factor is still very important. I mean, you mentioned the pandemic. What I've noticed is that you know, in most buildings or you know, in places that there's technology, you also need the human factor to control and check things.
Yeah.
How can you replace that?
Well, that's a good point, because basically, when you look at these layers of security, and there's concepts. For example, there's, you know, take an onion. When you cut an onion, you see all these different layers. And, you know, so these layers are applied in a sort of philosophical way towards mitigating against risks. So you have technology, you have policies and procedures, but you have this people component. And you're right, you have to rely on the people component. That's never going to go away. Many facilities will institute, for example, now during this pandemic period, thermal cameras. So these thermal cameras are sensing temperature when people are walking through an entrance. And if your temperature is at a certain level, they get pulled aside and they get asked certain questions, because as we know, you know, going through the pandemic checklist, temperature is a factor. So many institutions use handheld devices. So others have allotted this thermal camera, and they've had this huge expense in putting these thermal cameras. And what they do is they analyze temperature. But in the end, you know, this sends an alarm. Somebody has to see it. Somebody then has to respond to it.
And to say stop.
And say stop. Correct. Yeah. Correct. And then so that there is obviously the percentage of maybe human error, and you try to eliminate that with redundancy, and, you know, signals and alarms go off. But you're completely 100% correct. In the end, there still is a human component. And the human component isn't always 100%. So
technology will never analyze situations the same way as a human eye and the human perception of the situation at that particular point.
And you're correct.